In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. I hope that everyone is surviving and doing the best that they possibly can in these crazy times. Today I'm going to be talking about The Ghost. This is a movie that came out in 1963, and it stars Barbara Steele, who was in so many classic gothic horror movies, especially gothic horror. She's the female equivalent of people like Christopher Lee, Vincent Price, Karloff, Lugosi, all of the classic gothic horror actors. She is just really good in every movie I've seen her in. You might call her the original Scream Queen, but in a lot of ways she's more sort of the villainous, sinister character, but she plays both really well, as I will show you. Or tell you. So this movie follows Dr. Hitchcock and his wife, played by Barbara Steele, and she has fallen in love with this guy who I believe is Dr. Hitchcock's physician, and he has gotten sick. He's paralyzed from the waist down. He's in a wheelchair. The physician and Barbara Steele are in love, and they plan to kill him, which they do, but following that, there is a series of strange occurrences that lead them to believe that they are being haunted by his ghost, hence the title of the movie. This is a classic gothic horror story meets murder mystery. It's very much an old dark house story in the vein of stories like The Old Dark House or later on House of the Long Shadows. There's a lot of questioning throughout the movie of, is this actually something supernatural or is somebody else putting these people on? We've got Barbara Steele, as I said, and she's being very, very Barbara Steele here. She plays the wife really well, and both sides of her. She's got this sinister ulterior motives side, but also this very tormented and sad side. At points you're just like, this person is terrible, I hate her, and at other points you just sympathize with her because she's being horribly tormented. And ultimately I really grew to like her, even though she is not a good person at all. She is probably one of the least worst people in this movie. She kind of plays this over-the-top role, but it's not sort of a cut and dry stereotype. There is depth to her character. Dr. Hitchcock is extremely over the top. He's very, very aggressive and demanding, and when he rings the bell to get the servant to come in, he's like flailing it everywhere. But there is a lot there with his character. He's angry, but there's also sort of a sad side to him because of his inability to get around in the wheelchair, but ultimately, he's really not a good person, even though you kind of see why he's angry and frustrated. He's also a mad scientist and apparently a devil worshipper, although they don't really go into that much, and you kind of wonder why they brought it up at all. And there's a prologue that I don't understand, but that's not going to get talked about here. All the acting in this movie is good enough for what it needs to be. It's not the most realistic acting I've ever seen, but this is a melodramatic gothic murder mystery. I was expecting some slightly overwrought melodramatic performances, which is what I got, and I enjoyed that. There's also the character of the maid, who after Dr. Hitchcock dies becomes possessed and talks in his voice, and she just has this look about her and her eyes roll back into her head, and she's just opening her mouth a little bit too wide, and it's just super, super hammy, and I absolutely love it. It goes well beyond the level of melodrama it needs to, but I enjoy it for that reason. Visually, this movie is incredibly standout as well. There's just beautiful gothic sets. They have a lot of detail to them. It's not just style over substance. There's a portrait in the background that means something. There's a music box that means something. There are boxes and coffins and things everywhere. Not everything has this significance to it, but enough of it does that it doesn't just feel like they're cramming a bunch of stuff in there just for the sake of it, even though I would have loved it anyway, because it just looks beautiful. There's a lot of attention to detail, and it's just really ornate, and there are lots and lots of candelabras. Probably more than they needed, but I don't care. I love them. That's just the mansion or castle of Dr. Hitchcock. Outside of that, we've got the landscape surrounding the mansion. There are autumn leaves on the ground. There's a light fog over everything, and that is gorgeous as well. I love everything about the visual look of this movie. We've got amazing gothic period costumes, although I'm not sure what period it's supposed to be. It's clearly not the 1960s when this came out. It's a previous time, and all of the costumes are just really elegant and beautiful, and I do not care that I am a 18-year-old boy living in 2020. I want Barbara Steele's wardrobe in this movie because she has just this beautiful black mourning attire that she's wearing, and it's amazing. Because of all of the visuals in this movie, this one, like I said with The Devil's Nightmare, really deserves to be remastered because the quality on this thing is not the best, which I'll get to, but it really does deserve to have a lot of the grain and the color fading taken out of it, because this movie would probably be appreciated even more if you could really take in the beautiful visuals in a remastered form. The visuals were a high point of this movie, and I kind of thought it would trump the plot of the movie for me, but it doesn't. The music is nice. It has an eerie elegance to it. It can be super melodramatic, but it isn't always. It's usually fairly restrained, actually. And there's a music box theme that's associated with the dead Dr. Hitchcock that recurs multiple times, which I really, really enjoyed. This is another Italian production with bad dubbing, but I don't care. The film is really grainy. The digital version that they've got on here gets a little weird in places, and the audio's a little bit choppy. It really does deserve to be remastered because it is a beautiful looking movie and would be a really beautiful sounding movie if they were able to do some work on the soundtrack. So if something like that exists, let me know. I kind of doubt it, but I want it. Story-wise, as I said, this is really good. I wasn't really expecting there to be these sinister motives on the part of the lovers, Barbara Steele and the physician guy. I was kind of expecting another clean-cut, boring romance that we get in a lot of classic horror movies, but this is not that. This is the best kind of romance that we see in gothic horror, where there is an evil undercurrent to it. These people are honestly just the worst couple ever. There seems to be some kind of love between them at first, and there kind of is, but they also have their own motives, and it seems pretty clear that they're just in it for Dr. Hitchcock's money, but they also kind of still love each other, and there's a little bit of abusiveness, and you can't tell if they love or hate each other. It's very mixed. It's not a clean-cut thing. There's a lot of feelings there that the characters don't know what to do with, and I enjoyed that. When they're planning to kill the doctor, there are some good moments. There's a scene where the physician is shaving Dr. Hitchcock. They keep hinting at the fact that he might just randomly slit his throat at any time, but you just don't know. It almost had a Sweeney Todd kind of feel, which I enjoyed. And there's this weird mixture of mad science and the occult that gets brought up because Dr. Hitchcock is apparently both a devil worshiper and a scientist, and he tries to bring science into the occult, and there's a book that he's got that talks about the manifestation of spirits. They kind of throw that aspect away, but it was still sort of an interesting idea that they brought into it. Of course, once we've had like a classic reading of the will scene and a funeral and all of that, we start seeing these different little haunting set pieces, which were relatively subtle, which I appreciated. They're rarely overdone. There's a moment where Dr. Hitchcock appears as like a full-body ghost, and he's got some not particularly convincing like decay makeup on. That was the other thing. The decay makeup wasn't particularly good, but I didn't really care, and I didn't really care that that was a little bit overdone, but the rest of it is really done in a subtle kind of creepy way, which I appreciated. This movie goes over the top sometimes, but doesn't always. It usually stays fairly restrained and creepy, which for this kind of movie I liked. It was this mixture of over-the-top melodrama and spooky subtlety that worked for me. And that is basically my spoiler-free review. I just have a warning. There is a furry animal that dies in this movie, so if you don't like that happening in movies, you're not gonna like this. It is off-screen. We never even see said animal, but it does die, and it's not pleasant at all. That is my spoiler-free review of The Ghost. Here are the spoilers. So as I was literally just saying, there is a furry animal that dies. There's a dog that right after the funeral will not stop howling, so the physician goes to the window by request of Barbara Steele's character and ends up shooting it, and we just hear it howling, and we hear a gunshot, and the howling stops, and it's sad. There is a box that is discovered at the reading of the will that is supposed to have all the jewels of Dr. Hitchcock in it, which is very much what the two lovers are after, but they find out that Dr. Hitchcock was buried with the key, so they have to go into the crypt and open his coffin to get the key off of his person, which has a very similar feel to a very similar scene in Mr. Sardonicus, if you've seen that movie, and I really enjoyed that part. Although, given some plot twists that come up, I have some questions. There is a death in this movie that I literally do not understand at all. They find a hanging body in the attic, and I literally have no clue who that was supposed to be. I don't remember that character. I don't know who he is or how he has any significance. There's just a hanging body in the attic, which is supposed to freak you out. I thought it was this one priest character who we saw earlier, but he shows up in a later scene, so I have no idea who that was supposed to be. I probably just wasn't paying enough attention, but I don't see how that was relevant to literally anything. The servant gets possessed by Dr. Hitchcock again and tells Barbara Steele that there's a secret compartment in the coffin where the jewels actually are, because they eventually open the box and there's nothing in there. It's just kind of a weird bit of exposition that felt forced, but I'll get to that in a moment. She opens that box and there's nothing there. The servant shows up and is like, your lover has already been here. He has taken all the jewels for himself. She goes to him and he's kind of been abusive and awful throughout the movie, so they have another bit of conflict, and he's actually leaving because he's like, you know what, this relationship's not going to work out. And she's just like, wait a second, are you just doing this because you've got the jewels and you don't want me to have them? His bag gets knocked over and all the jewels spill out, so that's kind of what you think, but at that point I'm kind of like, no, I think the servant put the jewels in there and has framed you. But Barbara Steele doesn't care at this point. I hate that it's taken her this long to realize that she's not in a healthy relationship. He's actually innocent of the thing at this point, but she ends up grabbing a razor, which he also dropped, and slashing him up and then burning his body, and it's very brutal. It's not graphic or anything, but as she's slashing, they actually drip blood over the camera, and it's a really, really cool visual. Following that, I was kind of like, they're just gonna reveal it was the nurse the whole time, aren't they? And then Dr. Hitchcock shows up, and he's been alive the whole time and has been using the nurse to make Barbara Steele thinks she's been going crazy. Then he's just like, thank you for your services, you may go now. And the nurse is like, thank you, it was my pleasure, and starts to walk out of the room, and he just pulls out a gun and shoots her. When Barbara Steele went to the coffin, there was like a paralyzing drug on the coffin, and she cuts her hand on the coffin. She gets this paralyzing drug into her bloodstream, which starts basically turning her into what Dr. Hitchcock was, and she actually sits down in the wheelchair and starts becoming that as he laughs. He then like shoves it into her hand and puts her fingerprints on it so she'll get framed for it, then is like, I'm gonna go disappear into this bookcase that I materialized out of. You bet you didn't know there was a secret passage over here. She has just poured herself this drink, which she had put poison in because she was going to commit suicide because everybody she loved was dead. And he finds it and was just like, oh, you've been drinking my gin again. Well, to your ill health. He drinks it, and Barbara Steele just collapses into this wonderful evil laughter. He actually starts choking and dying. He ends up starting to die behind the bookcase. The police, or what passes for the police in this movie, come in and just see Barbara Steele basically paralyzed in this chair laughing, and they take her out. The priest, who has talked with Dr. Hitchcock early in the movie and said some stuff about the devil is real and you must be wary of him, he's just hearing this thumping from behind the bookcase, which is Dr. Hitchcock trying to get out, but the priest just looks up at the portrait of Dr. Hitchcock and goes, I told you the devil was a real person, and leaves. And I don't know if he was just like, ooh, spooky noises, and didn't actually know what was happening, or he knew full well what was happening. He was just like, I'm gonna let you die trapped behind this bookcase. But either way, the ending of this movie is so crazy, full of twists, a little bit convoluted, leaves me with some questions, but I absolutely loved it. This is what a classic gothic old dark house story should be. It's far from perfect, but I recommend checking it out. That's my review of The Ghost. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye.